Our second speaker has joined us, Don Blevins. He is the county clerk for Fayette County.
Well, good morning, everyone.
If you'd like to go ahead and talk with us about how COVID-19 pandemic has affected voting and what is going to happen with our primary elections and how that's affected your job and what we need to do to make sure that people can vote in the primary election.
Right. Well, COVID-19 has completely disrupted our election. Is probably the short answer to that. You all may, if you've been following along in the paper, buried in the budget language was a little line that basically said the governor and the secretary of state, if they agree, can issue comparable orders and direct the state board of elections to make just about any changes they need in an emergency situation. So it wasn't quite carte blanche, but it was close. And so what's happened since then is a lot of discussion around having expanded absentee ballots. Now, that's fancy words for we want people to mail their ballots in. That's the bottom line. We want to minimize contact between voters and election officers and the like. So that's the overview that was given. The final emergency regulation passed by the state board has a little bit more detail in it that gives us direction at the county level of what we can and can't do. But effectively, they've asked us to substantially reduce the number of in-person polling locations. They've asked us to create a special in-person by appointment only voting location. And I'll talk about that more in a second. And then lastly, vastly expand mail-in absentee balloting. And the way they did it was to expand the reasons that you can request an absentee ballot to include a declared medical emergency such as the one we're in. So that becomes a reason why you can request your absentee ballot. You all may recall that under our current rules, if we followed our normal procedures, the only reason you can get an absentee ballot by mail is if you have reasons due to age, disability, or illness. Well, we've expanded the meaning of illness to include a pandemic. So how are we going to do that? Well, this is a daunting challenge. So let me throw a little math at you so you all can feel my pain. 4 years ago, we voted 60,000 people in person. So as a starting point, you could say, estimate 60,000 people will return a ballot. You can argue that the presidential race is largely decided. People may just decide not to vote because of that. So one argument would say we're going to have fewer voters than the 60,000. We're being told, on the other hand, in every state that's ever done this, that's always increased turnout because of the ease of voting. So you could expect to increase. At the end of the day, I have to plan for the worst case. So the number I'm going to use is 100,000 ballots. Let that soak in. 100,000 ballots. Just storing them is going to be a challenge. So how are we going to do this? Another thing you need to know, we just learned last Friday from some folks in Colorado and other states that do mail-in ballots all the time and have been doing it for 10, 12 years. They said that after 10 or 12 years, they've gotten people educated enough that they'll return their ballots earlier. And so that on election day and the few days afterwards, as the trailing ballots come in via the mail, they've got it down to 25% being at the last minute. When they started, however, it was as high as 40. So that means in our scenario, we could expect 40,000 ballots to come back at the last minute. That's a daunting challenge. So another question we had to ask was, what about signatures? How do you all do that? Well, they automate it, is how they check signatures. In fact, they're really smart in some states like Hawaii, where they send out a signature card each year to get a fresh signature from all their voters. And then that's scanned into their system. And then that's what's used in their automation. So they have very recent, very fresh signatures. We don't have time to do that this time. So our signature database has things like all the people that have registered online recently. It either pulled over their driver's license signature, which, as you all know, is tiny, and you have to write kind of pinched when you do it. So it's not your perfect signature. Or they sign with a mouse, which is wild. So we're not going to be able to match those signatures very easily. Secondly, we have a whole generation of folks between about 18 and, I don't know, 35 that were not taught cursive. In fact, we're taught that cursive is easier to forge. So they sign their names slightly differently every time. So that's going to be a challenge. And then lastly, there's folks like me and my father that have been living in the same house for decades. So our signature is stale, meaning that I haven't filled out a voter registration card in decades. So my signature has definitely changed because I've got arthritis now, and you know, old age ain't fun. So when they try to match my signature, it will be a challenge. So all of that is in our database today, and when we try to analyze the signatures, that's going to be an interesting feat. Well, when I asked the Colorado folks how this works for them, they said after 12 years, we've got it down to 0.5%. Okay, in our scenario, that's 500 voters. That seems manageable. I said, well, how was it at the start? 6%. That's 6,000 people. That's going to be a challenge because part of the executive order is that we have to allow a voter whose signature is substantially non-compliant for some reason. We have to allow them a chance to do what's called a signature cure. That has not been worked out yet by the state. So I'm not really sure how quickly we can do that and how we're even going to do it. We have started some automation work to try and give us a leg up, and then we'll just have to see. So now I'm going to shift into describing how we're actually going to do this. Everything I'm about to say is preliminary. I haven't gathered my county board of elections. We haven't voted on this yet, but I think we're in general agreement on the following. So the emergency regulation requires a minimum of 1 in-person location by appointment and a minimum of 1 in-person location just for the general public. The one that's by appointment is really a tip of the hat to our ADA community. What we want to do there is, if you are a voter who wants to vote independently, but you don't feel comfortable using a mailed ballot, we will allow you to schedule an appointment and come to a particular location at your appointment time and vote independently or with assistance if you need it, and be able to vote independently without worrying about whatever challenge you have at home via the mail. So that's really what that location is intended for. Tentatively, I'm planning on using our senior center here in Lexington. It's ideally suited for this. We have parking spaces that are right by a classroom in the front of the building. We can enter and leave on the side of the building. It's all handicapped accessible. It's about as ideal as it could be. So that's where we would do the by appointment. The main location, you can argue lots of ways in voting. A lot of people are expecting us to have ready to take calls yet, so please don't. That's not going to happen. Just to let you know, that's how fight hard not to open more than one, and here's why. If I have 5 locations on an election day, just say big locations somewhere in town, think high school gyms and that sort of thing, people will go to them. We don't want that. We want you to use the mail. So I'm not going to encourage that behavior. So what we're going to do is 1 location. It's not been decided which location we're going to use, but think something like a high school gym somewhere, possibly Commonwealth Stadium, possibly BCTCS on Newtown Pike. You know, a fairly central location that's got good parking. We need to think about the management of vehicle traffic and all those sorts of things, because there will be a few hard-headed people that show up on election day and want to vote. Between now and then, however, you're going to see my face on the airwaves a lot saying, please don't do that. Don't do it. You're going to have a bad day if you show up to the location to vote on election day. Please request an absentee ballot and do it by mail or drop off. We'll also have some drop off locations. I haven't really worked out that either. You'll notice a lot of TBD in my language today. It's that hard, and we're still that early in the planning process. So for ballot requesting, the state board is about to issue postcards to every registered voter in the state. And the postcard will give you direction on how to go online and request your absentee ballot to be mailed to you. That is the most efficient way, and that's where we will try to steer as many voters as we can. That card is to be mailed on or about May the 22nd, next Friday. But they won't mail it until the portal's ready that I'm describing, which is being built as we speak on the fly. Hopefully it works. because if it doesn't, my phone lines will get overwhelmed and we will have a disaster on our hands. So the portal will be available any day now. Once it is, we'll send out those postcards to every registered voter. They will be encouraged to go online and request their ballot. That request will come to my office. We'll build a package of the security envelope you're used to seeing, the return envelope for sending it back to us, and your ballot, and then some instructions. The return postage is prepaid by the state board, so no one has an excuse not to use mail-in ballots. It's as easy as it can be, and it costs you nothing except the time to request your ballot. You may also call our office to request the ballot. That will invoke a different process. It's a little more cumbersome. We have to either email you or mail you your application for the ballot, and then you have to return that. So you can see that from a workload point of view, that doing the online portal is by far the most efficient way to do it. Once we get a request and we mail you your ballot, we're doing some smart things like putting barcodes on the address labels so that when your ballot comes back to us, we can actually barcode scan the fact that we received your ballot. We can also use the same system, at least to assist with some of the signature matching that we need to do, so that we can bloop your ballot and hold it up and it'll automatically pull up your signature so we can compare it very quickly and keep moving. Once the ballots are back to my office, either by drop-off, I haven't figured out yet, but something like 2 locations, a north and a south location, manned by hopefully National Guard. You come by, there's a big blue box with a lock on it, you put your ballot in and you move on. So we'll allow that as well for a way to return your ballot. Some people are uncomfortable with the post office handling their ballots, so they want to drop it off themselves. So drop off or US mail, it all will eventually come back to my office. We will use the barcode system that I was describing. Once the ballots are checked in, they will be sealed in a container and taken to our warehouse where we will have the ballot processing done. What does ballot processing look like? We will open up your outer envelope, pull out your security envelope, compare those signatures like we always do. Everything's in order. Eventually we tear the flap off the inner envelope, and your security envelope is mixed in with a bunch of others so that your privacy is maintained. Eventually the inner envelope, the security envelope is open and your ballot is revealed. Your ballot will then be placed in a scanner and scanned, and your vote will be counted. All of that will have to be open meeting. Haven't solved that either, but I'm planning on something like cameras out at the warehouse that can be live streamed, or possibly on GTV3, something like that, so that people can watch us while we do this. We're required to have observers. I will restrict that quite a bit to one area in the warehouse, probably require them to wear masks and that sort of thing. When can we start processing the ballots? June 1st, which is good news. Instead of like normally we're only allowed to process the ballots on election day. There would be no way to do that. So they're allowing us to begin processing the ballots and literally feeding them into the scanners as of June 1st. So I will have a team at the warehouse starting June 1st, processing the inbound ballots all the way until June the 29th. The back end of the election is going to be a little different than we're used to. Because people can mail them up to the day of the election, as long as it's postmarked by June 23rd, we will accept it. The mail will come in, and we have election day as well. All of that will continue to trickle in for a few days afterward. So the regulation allows us to continue to count and process ballots all the way up through June 29th, the following Monday. On June 30th, we will tender our certification for the results to the State Board of Elections and the Secretary of State's office. So you won't get the results on election day. They won't be accurate, particularly if we get 40% of our ballots that day and afterwards. We won't have processed them yet. No decision has been made on interim results. You know, do we publish, for example, the absentees up until that day? We could do that if we want. I'm going to be against that. And the reason is it's going to be terribly misleading. Those of you that have worked on campaigns know that the absentee results by themselves are normally very misleading. One year I remember Allison Leonard and Grimes looked like she was going to beat Mitch McConnell in the absentees at Fayette County, and then she ended up getting trounced. So they're very misleading to use those early results, and I don't want to use them. Let's see. That's kind of the overview of how things are going to work. Why don't we go to questions, Jen, and see what people want to know?
Great. Thank you so much for that information. I mean, it's really been, yeah, I think everybody feels like they're in the dark and like there's a lot of confusion and stuff. And clearly this is a big undertaking that you all are having to totally switch gears. And particularly since we were so excited this year that you had the new ballot machines where we were able to just feed in. And so we're so
Right.
excited about that. And then here it is, another wrench in the works. But yeah, let's go ahead and open it up for questions. Diana, do you have a question? I see your hand is raised.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Go ahead.
I have two questions, and you may not be able to answer them because they have more to do with the state. But is it possible to find out the name and the county of people whose postcards could not be delivered? First one.
Yes. What they're going to do now, keep in mind that our voter registration rolls are bloated, and that's for a good reason. We don't remove a person from the rolls unless we are for sure know that they've moved or are deceased or whatever. So what happens over time is Americans move a lot, and we don't tend to update our registrations. And people that move out of state, we don't know because at the state level, coordination is not very strong between state to state. So you'll stay on our voter rolls. To be removed, you have to miss 2 federal elections in a row, and then there's a whole sequence of letters sent to you. It's a whole convoluted, long process to remove somebody from the rolls. So over time, we get more and more people on those rolls. So in order to conduct this election, there's no way we can send everybody a ballot because a large percentage of them will just go to nobody and be returned to the state board, wasting a lot of money. So that's why they're using the postcard mechanism. I think that got your question. Oh, once those cards come back, the plan is to use that as a part of the mechanism to begin clearing up the rolls. So over time, the state board will get all of those postcards that are returned, and they will enter them into the process for eventually purging a voter.
So that won't be done before the election, however.
No.
Okay. So there's no way that a party can find out who those people are.
You could probably find out, it's going to take the state board months to enter in all the information for those postcards. It's a pretty big problem. The last time they did that, they found like 167,000 people that needed to be checked on. That was a year ago. So this is a big task. It'll take them a few months just to get it entered, and then I suppose you could do an open records request or something if you really want to know who they are.
Okay, thank you.
Lois Gillespie? Do you have a question? Liz, I think she's muted. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Blevins. So I'm unclear on the process for someone who has registered to vote and then they've moved and haven't updated their registration. They're still eligible to vote. When's the last day they can change their address, or how do they go about still voting by June 23rd if their address is incorrect on their voter registration? Did that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and thank you for reminding me, gold star for that question. This is the one thing that I was going to ask the league to help with today, and between now and May 26th, you still have the opportunity to either register to vote or update your registration if your address has changed. So you can check that very easily on my website, FayetteCountyClerk.com. There are 2 links on the front page just for this purpose, where you can update your registration or check it to see if it's the correct address. Or if you're not registered, you can go ahead and register to vote. All of that's very easy and still there. You can do it through May the 26th. Please get it done. That way we can ensure that when we do mail you your ballot, you get it at the right location. So great question. That's how you do it.
But what about the boneheads who don't update their registration? Secretary of State Adams in the May 1st Board of Elections meeting said explicitly no one will be turned away to vote in person, regardless of if their address is current or not. I believe I've read on your website, which is fabulous, by the way, that people, even with the incorrect address, can go to a polling location on voting day and still vote. So I'm wondering about if that process is still in place.
The short answer is I'm not certain.
Okay.
There's some complications here that we're going to have to figure out between now and Election Day.
Okay. I don't know if they would get one of
What you're
those.
saying is half true and half not. So if you have moved within your precinct or within your county, you're correct. You can still,
Okay.
you just have, under normal circumstances, you vote at your home precinct, the correct precinct. And you fill out a card called an oath of voter card.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Remember that process. So that's probably what he's talking about. If you've moved out of the county to another county and you haven't updated your address on time, then you're not eligible to vote.
Okay. It has to be in precinct. Okay. Thank you, sir. You've cleared that up, and I really appreciate that.
No problem.
Thank you. Mark, I believe you had your hand up.
Questions. One, ideally, I guess it would have been planned years in advance to make a big shift like this. From what the Secretary of State and the Governor came up with and what you are implementing, it seems like it makes a whole lot of sense. I just wanted your opinion. Are you considering the constraints you've been put under? It sounds good to me. How do you feel?
Well, I have mixed feelings. Generally, I'm in agreement with what they're wanting to do. I mean, let's just start with, no way are we doing in-person voting. That would just be ridiculous under our current circumstances. It spiked the number of positive cases tremendously. And that's what happened in Wisconsin. They were foolish and went ahead with their in-person voting. So that, for me, was off the table 6 weeks ago or longer. The second thing that was considered, we've been negotiating back in the back room, so to speak, about doing all mail voting for quite a while. It took a while to convince the Secretary of State in particular. As you know, the Republican Party is generally not really enthusiastic about mail-in voting, despite the fact that it really doesn't change anything. If it's a red state to begin with, it stays a red state after you turn to mail-in voting. That doesn't really affect anything. But for whatever reason, they're not real comfortable with it. So it took a while to convince them, and once we did, that was the way to go. Also on the table, just to raise your eyebrows, is canceling the primary altogether and having the parties pick their candidates. That was not realistically considered, but I was advocating for that for a while because there's really no point at this point in my mind, because the presidential is largely decided. There are some down ballot races that could be just moved to the fall and put all the candidates on the ballot. There's different ways we could have solved that if we wanted to. I'm not seriously suggesting it now. However, if we have a huge spike in cases and our hospitals get overwhelmed or something, and by June things are really traumatically bad, that might come back on the table. So given the two extremes of not doing in person and not going to kill the election, the only answer was to go vote by mail. And so we all were very supportive. The clerks were very supportive of that. The discomfort I have is that the Secretary of State has never run an election, certainly not at the local level. Most of the members of the state board and the staff there don't know how it works at the local level. So some aspects of the emergency regulation are a little troubling for us to actually implement. We're still working with the state board to try to smooth out a few of those things. It may require them tweaking their emergency regulation between now and June. So it's sort of the answer is the devil's in the details, and the details have been very challenging.
And do you have any insights into voting in November?
Oh, that is the most frightening part of this. My crystal ball says we're going to be right where we are in November, and that is still wanting to be healthy at home, possibly healthy at work, but most likely, not wide open again, and still with the threat of overwhelming our healthcare system. So we're going to face the same decision in November, in my opinion, and probably arrive at the same conclusion. However, that number is going to be, you know, we did 72% back in '08 with Obama, just to give you an idea. I think this federal election and the general election this year will have turnout like we've never seen before. So that means, you know, several hundred, probably 200,000 ballots or something like that for me in Fayette County. I can't do that just by throwing an army of people at it. It gets too unwieldy. There's an upper limit to the number of people we can control and methodically go through opening those ballots. So we're going to have automation, particularly for the signature parts of it. Machines just to open the ballots, probably, you know, the mail opening machines. It's going to be a real challenge. So if we're going to do that, we need to start planning right now for it. I guarantee you that's not going to happen, and feet will be drugged until maybe August or September, you know, the wait and see. And if we try to do this last minute like we're doing this primary, it'll be a fail. So it's time to start thinking about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope we're better off. I hope my crystal ball's wrong, but you know, you all can see it as well as I. It's not going away.
So, Don, one point I wanted to clarify. You kind of mentioned that the presidential election has been decided. What you mean by that is that the candidates who will be running for both the Democratic and the Republican parties have been decided, not that the final race has been decided.
Correct. Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. That's what.
And Cindy, you have a question?
I just want to follow up on Lois's question about the postcards. I'm assuming, and I'm just wanting you to clarify, if people update their address up until the last opportunity to request a ballot, will they still get postcards? So if we get beyond the 22nd of May and people update their addresses, will postcards go to them?
I don't think so. I think we're going to get one shot at the postcards. That's going to be on or about May 22nd. So that's next Friday. People need to, you know, I don't know when they're going to start printing them. If they may have already started printing them. If that's the case, then it's almost too late for you to change your address. That said, you still want to do it so that we can get you your ballot. It just means you won't get a postcard. And listen, postcards won't be the only way we advertise this. It's going to be splashed everywhere on TV and websites and so forth. So the postcard is just to wake up the voter. One way, only one way that we're going to contact you.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. This has been a great presentation.
Oh,
I'm sure glad I'm not in your shoes.
Yeah, this has not been fun. I haven't talked about this. The rest of my office is still open. We're not open to the public. Here's a challenge for you. Do I reopen to the public between now and June? No, I can't, because everybody in my office became a member of my elections department as of the day we said we're going to do a mail-in ballot. I need all of them. So how do we keep things going between now and June with the threat of the virus taking out a county clerk's office? It's already happened. At least 5 or 6 cases that I'm aware of where an entire office in a smaller county had to shut down and quarantine for 2 weeks. How do we do an election under those circumstances? So what I've done is we're doing the best we can. We have masks. We're about to get some temperature gauges so I can take everybody's temperature when they come in the door. We're staying shut down to the public at least until July so that I can get through this election. Even with all that, you know, there's a chance that one of my staff will contract the virus. Anybody that they're closely associated with at work will have to quarantine, and I'll lose, you know, some chunk of people. The other challenge we have, there's a new act that some of you that are employers might know about called the FFRCA. What that says is if you've lost child care for a child 17 or under, or your school is closed due to the COVID crisis, you can take emergency family medical leave for up to 12 weeks. And there's some requirements and so forth, but it's pretty straightforward. You can just say, I need to go watch my children because I have no way of doing childcare. That's affected my workforce already, one of which was in my elections department. That was not a happy day for me, but the employee was well within their rights to do that. So it's not just an election, it's that we're trying to keep the office open and record deeds and mortgages and do the motor vehicle related things. I have to do that just so that I can continue my payroll. when Councilmember Bledsoe was talking about furloughs and layoffs, that's the last thing we need to do as a government, if we can help it. You try and keep government employees paid because that's the safety net for the economy. If we start laying off government employees, you're going to see the economy implode. We just can't do that if we can help it. Sorry, that was my soapbox for today.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Lois?
Yeah, so someone said, I think it was Secretary of State Adams mentioned that Jefferson County's, no, it was Josh Douglas who mentioned Jefferson County's portal is already open. And then I spoke to somebody yesterday from Scott County who said she had already received a postcard. And I was just confused by both of those statements. Can you clarify that?
Well, some counties, Jefferson in particular, has a fairly large IT staff. She may be doing something to automate requests currently while waiting for the main portal to
Okay, that
open.
makes sense.
That's probably what that is. I'm aware that Kenton County is doing something like that, but under current law and current circumstances, you still have to fill out an application and sign it and get it back to your county clerk. One of the things we were trying to get relaxed was allowing, if you're going to allow someone to go online and request a ballot, why can't we go ahead and take your information over the phone and allow you to request a ballot without having to send you the application through the back and forth? That's one of the tweaks we would like for the state board to allow us to do, just to give you an idea.
Okay, thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much. This has been really helpful. So I appreciate you spending your time this morning to be with us. And I want to remind all of our league members that your dues are due on July 1st. So, that's important so we can continue the work that we are doing in our community to get the word out about voting and to help people understand what the new processes are involved with voting, and to make sure that we can continue our outreach. You can do that online on our website, and that is lwvlexington.com, and I will put that in the comments section. Again, thank you so much, Dom, for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it, and thank you everybody else for joining us this morning as well.
You're welcome. Thanks. Go up registrations, please.